Welcome everyone to the Emergent Essence Dynamics webinar number 17 on June 24th. And our theme today is Reconciling Essence and Identity. And it's following up from the past several webinars we've been doing around war games of identity, the process of reconciliation and forgiveness, and why forgiveness can be so difficult. And so this one is going to dig down into what is exactly the nature of essence, what is the nature of identity, its function, why is it there, how are the two working against each other, and how can we reconcile the two together so that they are working in harmony, because they are actually meant to work in harmony. But when we get too trapped in the identity, we can forget essence, and then the identity starts to battle essence, which is actually a natural function of itself, as I'll show you as we go along. So I think just before we started to record, I was getting into something around the battle. Yes, and that was, a lot of people give identity a bad rap. They give ego a bad rap. And if you notice in maybe New Age communities, spiritual movements, etc., they try to eliminate ego. And what I feel is that's just aggravating more identity. And I'll explain that in a little bit, because identity works in a polarity. It's almost like there's two sides of the same coin, and identity ends up battling itself. So where I'm coming from in the EED approach is that there's no need to eliminate ego or identity. Rather, what we do is we build more and more acceptance and resilience, which results in more humility, so that it can calm the ego down, so that it can actually, in a way, share control. And that's not actually an accurate word about sharing control. It is more of, it can realize that the very thing it's looking for, which is to return to essence, that the essence is always there and it's always within it. It was just blind to it. And when it can wake up to that fact, it can actually calm down and start flowing with essence, or really allowing essence to flow through it, so that ego then does not become a vehicle of control, which can then become a vehicle of destruction. It actually becomes a vehicle of flow and creation. That's where I'm going today with this, and we'll break it down. And if you want to get really on more esoteric, metaphysical, or spiritual levels, that it is an expression of the divine, and it is the divine really trying to express itself through everything. And the solution it came up with was, let's create identity. So, so what do we say it again?
I said it's a nice way of putting it. Its solution was to create identity.
Yeah, yeah. So if you want to say everything that exists today is the creation of God, well, so is identity. So let's just get used to that fact. It's not like it was a mistake. That's why I say we don't need to eliminate it. We need to reconcile ourselves with it. So what are we discovering today? I'm going to go through an overview of the relationship between ego and essence, how they function. And then we're going to look at how both of them can work together harmoniously. And along the way, so then there's simple guidelines of how we can realign ourselves with essence and begin to channel its resilience and creativity through the identity, as opposed to trying to move the identity aside and just trying to channel essence directly. Because we're in a bit of a denial if we think that we're going to live in our physical bodies and just eliminate identity altogether and just be this formless thing that's just a pure channel of spiritual energy or divine energy, or whatever you want to call it. So it's allowing our identity to still remain intact, but it's to channel that divine nature through ourselves, which ends up enriching our autonomy, which means sovereignty over self. And at the same time, it can reduce our fear and reactivity in life. Because that's one of the main drivers of identity, is by its very nature of being separate, it becomes fearful and reactive. I'll show you how that happens. Then also along the way, we'll give you some simple tips on loosening the grip of identity, because it tends to get rigid and it clings. And so how do we get it to relax, to uncling, to loosen that grip of power that it tries to hold? And when we can let the identity be more loose and relaxed, we can then become more fluid. And in fact, we can allow our identity to not be so boxed in with limited parameters, but in fact, we can have multiple identities. We can flow from one to the next. We can expand our sense of self and have greater range. That then gives us more fluidity in our daily life, in our daily experiences, in the way we relate to others, and in the way we relate to the world. Any questions or comments here before I move on? Just on general overview of what we're going to look at.
Well, from my side, it's not really clear to me, Troy, how the approach to eliminate the ego is firing back. You elaborated on that, but I did not get it.
Yeah, I think as we go along,
Cool.
I think I can answer that question gradually as we go along.
But otherwise, I'm fine.
Yeah, okay. My simple answer on that is, and when we look at polarity, that reaction of I must eliminate my ego is actually another aspect of ego speaking. So, which sounds paradoxical or weird, but I'll illustrate that as we go.
So it's activating the same polarity context.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Same polarity context and polarity complex. Yeah. Okay. So we're never actually moving off the level of polarity when we try to eliminate one, because we're only eliminating one side of the identity, and then the other side pops up and it's just battling itself, trying to eliminate itself.
So it's just keeping up the current on the polarity level.
Yeah.
Compare that to identity connected to essence.
Mm-hmm.
There is not really a context being activated, is it?
Yeah, we're not moving on a new level. We're just going in circles on the same level. I'll show that in the next couple of slides. So very briefly, for those listening to the recording who have never heard of emergent essence dynamics before, I'm going to just really briefly go through this. I know Benjamin, Paul, you're well familiar with this. Amy, this is a good rundown for you of what emergent essence dynamics is. It's all about relationships. We are in relationship with everything. So what we're looking at are relationship patterns. It's those patterns that are driving our issues. It's driving our actions. It's so if we can shift the pattern, we actually shift ourselves. We shift our issues because we've shifted our relationship to things. It's the patterns that are resulting from belief systems, or maybe the belief systems are influencing the patterns. But when we can break down the patterns into its simplest format, we realize, oh, this is a fractal, meaning it's a core pattern that's operating on all levels, from the very large to the very small. And in that way, when we can shift a fractal pattern that's happening in our relationship, we're shifting everything. Which the advantage of that is that I don't have to work on my biggest issue. I can work on something really small and manageable, knowing that it's going to affect the bigger issue. And I'll actually have more success if I shift a simple pattern in a simple situation of low consequence. And then I can just be more mindful of the new patterns that I'm developing in myself. So how do we, so what we're really doing is looking at the fundamental patterns driving human dynamics. That's relationship to self, to other, to the world, and even our relationship to time. And this can apply to lots of fields like coaching, leadership, mediation, facilitation, healing, especially personal growth. And there's three main things we're doing. A lot of people are obsessed with transformation. I want to transform myself. I want to transform the situation. And we're saying, before you do that at all, first build resilience. Build resilience in yourself. That's going to loosen the grip of the ego, trying to control everything. That has you connect to essence, which is the source of all expression. We'll define essence more clearly later. Then we can start to see the patterns through our actions and behaviors. We'll start to see those dynamics. And then we can start shifting those dynamics in a resilient space. Because when we are in a resilient space, we are more fluid, we're less threatened, and we're able to be more adaptable. So what we're looking at here are the patterns of identity. That's really what we're looking at here. And then what is essence and how does that provide resilience, fluidity, etc.? And why do those patterns emerge in the first place? Okay, that's really what we're looking at here. So I'm going to assume there's no questions there, but if there are, feel free to jump in. So yeah, did you have something, Amy, there?
Yeah, just quickly, it's interesting when you're building up, I found building up resilience, and then you do have this ego, and that they are battling because the resilience is growing, and it's kind of like the self-destruct side, like you said about the ego.
Yeah.
And it's like they're not flowing together, they're
Right.
clashing together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's really interesting to look at all of this.
Right, yeah. Because the ego, as you'll see, as I explain it further, the ego is really clinging to power. It's clinging to existence, and it won't let go. It's trying to be resilient. In fact, it doesn't even know it's using resilient energy, but it's trying to control all of it.
Yeah.
And when it can relax and allow things to flow through, it actually then wakes up and realizes, oh, I don't have to try so hard to survive because now I have a foundation coming from my own internal essence, whereas it didn't believe at first it had that connection.
Yeah, so, it's a journey.
So when people rush into transformation, they don't realize they're actually interacting with the ego of the other person or of the group. And that group is just going to fight and resist because change threatens their very existence. Okay. At a fundamental level.
Yeah.
All right. So let's define what is essence. What are your ideas of what essence is? I mean, and there's many names for essence. But this is the stuff beyond self. Pure essence. What comes up for you guys around how to define it or what it is?
I think it's a lot about how we perceive life and our surroundings.
Okay.
Like when we tune ourselves to look for essence, then we automatically become more perceptive. Can be various kinds.
Okay.
Yeah. But for example, one simple tool you taught was this peeling technique, like from a current emotional state, peeling down to the source. And this is the effect I'm having when I use that, for example.
Okay, so what you said there, peeling down to source. So essence is source. It's like, say, the source of all life, the source of everything. We'll think of it that way. Any other ideas there, Benjamin or Amy, or?
First came to me, it was kind of like all that encompasses the air around us, everything that's possible within the particles that exists in the air.
Yeah.
Does that sound?
Yeah. I like think of it as infinite potential, everythingness, right?
There's anythingness as well. Yeah.
The very stuff from which all manifestation springs forth, from which everything comes from.
Yeah.
So, you could use in quantum physics, their metaphor of the wave and the particle, and I call it a metaphor, that the particle is just a crystallized aspect of the entire source wave. All right. So the wave is the everythingness, all possibilities, and in one moment in time, it will collapse into an aspect of itself. So you could call essence the source, you could call it the divine mind of everything. You could call it the creator, the creator consciousness. Other people will call it God. But if anything, to make it very, very simple, it's beyond self, meaning it is no self. There is no identity, no self, no sense of self, no I am. It is just source being. So it is the state before creation, the state before expression. It is inertia, all potential infinite awareness. And let's say it's infinite awareness not activated, meaning it's not acting upon itself because it is everything. It's a total unity. So a great metaphor I can give you here is imagine essence as, or divine essence as an infinite mirror. That's all it is. It lives in the world of itself, and it's just one infinite mirror. Now, there's a problem with that. If something is an infinite mirror, it actually can't function as a mirror because it has nothing to reflect. So therefore, in order for it to know itself, to see itself, know itself, experience itself, to activate that all potential into creation, the mirror then decides to shatter. And this infinite mirror shatters into millions and millions and millions of tiny fragments and pieces. Now what can happen is those fragments can face each other in relationship. And now the mirror can express itself because it's now functioning as a mirror, which is to reflect. Okay? So that, in the sense, is what identity is. It's a fragment of the mirror. Now, what does that mean? Well, the divine source separated itself. It introduced the idea of separation. Now, what happens to all those little fragments? Those little fragments contain the consciousness of the divine source, and those fragments of consciousness believe, here I am, a fragment. I have a perimeter, I have a shape, I have a size, I have a depth. Okay, this is all I am, and it focuses on the shape and size of the fragment, and it forgets that it is made of the very substance of the divine source. And what the little fragments are trying to do, they're trying to come back together in unity so it can unify the source once again. You could also think of it as a holographic plate. You could shatter a holographic plate, and every little fragment of the plate contains the entire holographic image. So if we all are fragments of this mirror, we may get too obsessed and focused with the size and shape of the fragment. Your fragment's bigger than mine. That means, are you more than me? Are you closer to the divine source than I am? But what we forget is that we're all made of the same substance. And each little fragment actually brings a unique perspective, a unique point of view, a unique location from which to express that divine essence. So it's like each little fragment contains a particular color in one moment, and then the other fragment contains a particular color in another moment, and they can reflect, mix and match. And what they're doing is, through combination, bringing out all the various variations, limitless permutations of what that all potential can be. What's it like to hear that metaphor? Or what does that trigger in you?
I do a lot of art, and I do art therapy groups for charities. So to see things in colour is a very good metaphor for me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know in terms of healing for people, to have that kind of metaphor, particularly like the colour for one thing and the colour for another thing, it's really nice. It's a really nice definition. I like that.
Yeah, and what I'm hoping that this metaphor metaphoric definition conveys is that even though we're all of different sizes and shapes, reflecting different colors at a different time, we're all made of the same substance. And that's what's important to remember, is that we all contain the whole divine essence. We have access to that whole divine essence. And in fact, we don't have to repair the mirror. Because if we unify the mirror, the physical world ceases to exist. Because now we're back on the level of divine potential, inertia, right? And so, and if the mirror does come back together, it'll go back to that inertia, and then it'll shatter itself again for another round of expression, and then it'll come back together. So it's like a breathing of sending out, coming back in, sending out and coming back in. Okay. So how does that happen? How is identity born? So we could think then that, all right, so essence wants to express itself. It wants to create. So it makes a copy of itself. But it doesn't just make one copy, it makes two. Because it needs to have those copies in relationship with each other. This is why, even if essence divided itself in half to shatter the mirror, it becomes two. It doesn't just become one. It's moving from uniality to duality. And if you notice a mirror, you have one side reflective, the other side is opaque. And that's how it can reflect, right? So in a way, you could say it has a light and a dark. It has a good and an evil, or it has an emptiness and a fullness. And so the identity is, in a way, an empty copy of essence. It contains all of the substance, but it wants to express all of that substance. So in one hand, the identity is absolutely empty. It's nothingness. And then at the same time, it is everythingness. And in the world of essence, nothingness and everythingness is the same, all right? But in a world of duality, where things are split into two, nothingness is very different from emptiness. And therefore, our identity as an empty vessel wants to fill itself up with experience, knowledge, and it wants to become essence. It wants to return to source, and therefore it's in constant movement to try to fill itself up and imitate the fullness of essence, the everythingness. Now, there's a little catch here. In order to imitate the full spectrum of essence, the ego or the identity is trying to capture both opposites at once. So it's going to say, if I'm in a place called hot, I want to experience cold. But as soon as I'm experiencing cold, I'm no longer experiencing hot. Therefore, I got to go back and experience hot. I'm trying to experience hot and cold at the same time, because if I can do that, I'm experiencing the full spectrum of temperature. But here's the rub, or the problem here. On the level of identity, we're also on a timeline. Essence lives in a timeless world, all times, all at once. Whereas once it shatters, it's also shattering time. So we're at one place at one time. And so I can only move point by point along this spectrum of full experience. So therefore, I can only have one experience at one time. So in one moment, I'm hot. In one moment, I'm cold. Another moment, I'm warm. I'm somewhere in between. So this is where the identity is in constant motion to try and experience that full sweep of the spectrum at once. And it can have the illusion of moving through time to say, oh, I'm experiencing everything at once, but it's actually not. Every microsecond is only one point along that spectrum. And this is what creates our double bind of polarity, which I can show you in a second. But but this is what it looks like. We're always in motion. It's as soon as it thinks it's imitated essence, it realizes, no, there's another half of the spectrum. And so it's moving back and forth. And this is also explaining, why are we never fulfilled? Why, when I think I got what I wanted, it just doesn't feel like enough? Because there's still more. There's another side to the spectrum. So any comments there? How is this making sense?
It really is.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
Okay, great. So if we think of the identity is really just a vehicle to express the full spectrum of essence, then all we need to remember is we're always connected to the essence to flow through that vehicle. That's what the identity is for. Essence cannot, it's in a timeless place. It cannot live in this world. It therefore must start living through time. It's like descending to earth. And so it flows through the identity vessel, all right? One point at a time. Let's see. So this can then affect how we're in relationship with ourselves and with each other. And I've talked about this before in previous webinars around various levels of truth and the way we are in relationship. So if we look at the top level here, identity, every identity is going to, it's just one point of view. It's one point in one point of time, one location in a point of time. Therefore, it's got a very unique point of view. That's our individuality. That's our identity. It has a unique perspective. Therefore, it holds a singular truth from that point of view. One point of view is one singular truth of the everything. It's one slice of the pie, but it's not the whole pie, okay? Now we can get someone else in a different location with a different point of view, and they're going to have another truth, another singular truth. Now that singular truth may be somewhat similar to mine, or it may be very different. And when we put those two together, it can create opposition. What's true, what's not true, because they're two very different points of view. That's the level of game. That's where two stories come into relationship with each other and they can start to battle each other. There's friction only because each person is closed in their own point of view. They're closed in their own reality bubble, or they're rigid in their identity. What's going to keep my identity rigid? The stories I feed myself. I'm only going to seek what proves my story to be true. And if I'm not open to anything contradicting my story, I'm not going to expand my reality. So what does it take for me to open my bubble? It takes letting go, and it takes connecting to something resilient, meaning something beyond the self, meaning connecting to source. Source is the level of unified truth, where everything and nothing is true. It's the, again, like as we defined earlier, essence is the all potential, it's the everythingness, it's timeless. Therefore, hot and cold can coexist at the same time, along with every temperature on the spectrum. But when we're in a singular point of view, we're only at 1 degree at a time of temperature. So when we plug into source, we have resilience to not hold so rigidly to our stories. Therefore, then we can open our bubble and allow ourselves to be influenced. We can look over there at other people's worlds, other people's stories, other people's point of view, and allow that into ourselves. That starts expanding our bubble of reality. So the key to opening the bubble of reality, to expanding our point of view, is to first focus over there on what's in front of us, to accept it for what it is, become fascinated with it, and allow it in, allow it to affect us. And then we can move into some appreciation of what it is. All the while, that isn't a vulnerable act, because we have to open ourselves to possible threat. But when we're plugged into resilience, that becomes possible. And we have some humility to allow ourselves to not be so driven by the story and be open to new ideas. So a rigid identity is going to keep reinforcing our story, and it's going to keep reinforcing division, separation, opposition. When we can drop into a more fluid reality where the truth becomes fluid, it's in flux, the truth can flow back and forth, where hot and cold can start to become complementary as opposed to dire enemies of each other. We're expanding our reality. And then essence lives in the level of source. And that's not where we live, because that's where there is no identity. So what EED is doing, it's having us know our story, start to realize the patterns of the games. We can then cross this red line and drop into the dream. In order to cross that red line, we've got to cultivate resilience. It takes resilience to drop into the dream and allow fluidity so that the truths can become adaptable and complementary. We can plug into source and now allow source to flow into the dream, which then shifts the game, which then shifts our story. And when we reconcile essence and identity together, we'll have full access to all of these levels. So that in fact, all stories and games and dreams are fluid. And that speeds up our own evolution and growth as a human being. Because in every game, for every opposite truth presented to us, all it is doing is asking us to wake up and learn a lesson. When we can incorporate that new lesson, we've just expanded our point of view. How is it to hear that or see it explained in that way, and to look at the dynamics of how we can open our realities? Yeah, making sense, working. So I know I present this a lot. This is useful in various contexts. This is giving us a reason to reconcile identity and essence together. If we eliminate identity, we're eliminating story, we're eliminating game, we're eliminating dream, and we're just living at source. And that's not where we live. So we're in denial of our stories and games. We're in denial of ourselves and of each other if we try to eliminate identity. The key is to open the identity. So how do we do that? Remember, our identity is a vehicle through which we can express essence. Okay? So now I'm going to show you something here. We have two sides of ourselves. We have what we could call the resilient self and the pathetic self. Now, the only difference is that the resilient self is plugged into essence, where there's a free flow of essence through the vehicle. Okay? The pathetic self is disconnected. It's cut off from that source of essence. So there's this gap, there's this disconnect, and it's that disconnect that drives the pathetic self. So what happens is that disconnect or that gap has the pathetic self feel separation. And it's driven by that emptiness or disconnect. And it wants to return to source. Therefore, it's going to constantly seek a source, and it will not move anywhere near that gap, because that gap represents nothingness. It represents extinction. All right? So on the level of pathetic self, it's constantly driven by fear because of the separation. And when it feels the separation and that drive, remember, it's the identity is a vehicle to imitate essence. It has this drive to become just like essence, meaning it needs to know it exists and it needs to control its existence. So pathetic self is trying to play God. It's trying to become its own source, but it feels no source that it's plugged into. How's that sounding? Does it sound complicated, or is it actually kind of simple? Okay. So the pathetic self is constantly asking itself, I mean, they're both taking action, resilient self and pathetic self, okay? But they take action in two different ways. Pathetic self is constantly asking, am I okay? Because it feels that gap, that disconnect. And so it's seeking an outside source in order to validate its existence and in order to make sure that it will exist. That is two obsessions it has, validation and control. And that's how it will feel the power of life, is through validation and control. When that validation and control is satisfied, it feels like it is full of the essence, okay? But it will never be enough because it's never closed that gap. So it is in incessant, constant action, never satisfied, because it will never be able to answer the question, am I okay? Why? Because it always feels that gap behind it. The resilient self has closed that gap. It has created the connection to essence. It's flowing from essence and it has plugged back into essence. So there's this free flow of perpetual energy between it and essence. There's a free flow of essence into the vehicle. And then from there, the essence can actually take action through the vehicle. So because resilient self is plugged in, it has a statement. It just says, I am okay. I'm okay. Therefore, all the actions that it does take has nothing to do with survival. It has simply to do with expressing the source, creating from source. Essence moves through it to create. So resilient self is operating on this dream level, this open source. Pathetic self is operating on this closed level where it's in constant opposition. It's trying to absorb power, seek power, validate itself, control others, control itself, control its environment. It's playing God. Okay. So I don't want you to think that these are two separate selves. I want you to think of this as one vehicle, but two sides of the same coin. There's the connected side and the disconnected side, and we'll toggle between feeling connected to that internal essence or divine essence or feeling disconnected from it. And when we get disconnected, we feel that pang of emptiness, which produces fear, it produces reactivity. Then we start operating on pathologies, patterns that are running on automatic, learned patterns, okay? Resilient self is not a victim of the patterns. Resilient self can choose to use the patterns or create new patterns because it is connected to the essence, okay? Pathetic self is victim to patterns, meaning for every experience it got burned by, it's created a pattern or a pathology. Also, for every experience that it got burned by, it says, I'll never do that again, and it will lick its own wounds. So it indulges in pathos, drama, okay? There's several reasons why I call it pathetic self, and it's not meant as a pejorative. It's meant that it's driven by pathology, and its main pathology is, am I okay? And it's, do I exist? Am I okay? It can indulge in the fact that it's disconnected. It will create pathologies to try and cover up that disconnect. Okay, and it will thrive off drama because drama will give it the stimulus. This is where fear gives it a stimulus. Okay. How are you guys doing with this?
Good.
Okay. So what can happen then is when we get trapped in the identity, we get trapped in the pathetic self, we get trapped in our story level, we get trapped in this bubble. And then what can happen is, in order to reinforce itself, in order to feel valid, in order to feel like it's in control, the pathetic self is going to start listing out preferences and parameters for itself. I need certain values, I need certain beliefs in order to feel okay. And this is where values can get hijacked. This is where a sense of purpose can get hijacked because it's still driven by that gap, all right? So this is where we'll fall into identity traps. This is where, again, like for personal growth programs, coaching programs, leadership programs, if we are working with the identity and all the values that the identity is clinging to, we're not going to get much transformation because all we're doing is aggravating this gap. So therefore, no transformation is really going to happen. And then we're aggravating fear and we're aggravating opposition. And this is where then we can get into crusades, into warriorship, where we get into justice and punishment, etc. And there is a lack of humility that comes from the quality of transformation we're trying to achieve. Any statements on that? Or the implications of that? How you guys doing?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, good. So what we want is then, we don't want a separation between pathetic self, resilient self. Again, because what's going to happen then, first reaction is, oh, well, then I need to take all my pathetic selves and I need to convert them over to the resilient self, plug them into resilient self, and I'll just stay on this side. Well, we've just created an internal battle. And that, again, is the crusade to eliminate pathetic selves, to eliminate ego. I need to reunite with essence and just stay at essence and be in this kumbaya zen state of la 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 la, nothing affects me, I'm everything, I'm okay with everything. That's not what we're saying. Okay, there is a level of acceptance and ideally unconditional acceptance of everything, but it also doesn't mean that we just roll over and die. It means we still create, okay? So to give you an example, the pathetic self is obsessed with what's wrong with everything. It's constantly judging everything because it's constantly navigating where is it safe to go, where is it dangerous. So it's going to look at something and say, oh my God, look, I'm facing a wall here and look at the crack in the wall. That crack is dangerous. I can't believe there's a crack in the wall. Who put it there? If you switch over to the resilient self, it says, huh, cool, crack in the wall. Okay, great. I'm okay with that. And it won't do anything else. Because, I mean, it could say, sure, there's lots I could do with that crack in the wall. I could fill it, I could paint over it, I could make the crack bigger, but I could also leave the crack exactly as it is. So if we put the pathetic self in relationship with the resilient self, the pathetic self gives the resilient self a reason to create. We don't want the pathetic self to try to fix the crack in the wall or try to create from the crack in the wall, because it believes it possesses no source of creativity because it's driven by that gap. It knows deep down it is disconnected from source. It is disconnected from all creative energy. It doesn't realize that it's also the resilient self, that it also has the means to reconnect, okay? It's a switch of mindset. So we see the crack in the wall. Before we start to obsess about it and try to fix it and transform it, switch over to the mindset of the resilient self and say, all right, what are my choices? What are my options? And then coming from essence, we can proceed on what to do. So the pathetic self gives us a reason to create. The resilient self gives the pathetic self reason to keep identifying more cracks. But that's all it does, is it identifies the cracks. Then it gives the resilient self more refined reasons to create, all right? Essence may have the potential, let's say, to be a bridge that can bridge, you know, be this massive structure of a bridge that joins two lands together. That's a potential thing to exist, all right? Pathetic self can be on one side of the land and say, I want to get over to that other side, but there's a problem here. There's a problem. How do I get across that water? That water is an obstacle. And it will sit there and obsess and obsess and obsess about, why is the water there? I can't get to the other land. And I need to get to the other land to survive. Switch over to resilient self. It accesses essence. It pulls out the idea, let's build a bridge. Okay? Then the pathetic self says, what do you mean build a bridge? That's so complicated. There's so many materials we have to gather. How are we going to do that? That doesn't exist over here. How do we do that? Da, 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 da. Go back to the resilient self. It accesses essence. It says we can build bridges from these materials, this materials. Here's an idea. Here's a blueprint. Here's a design. Then the pathetic self says, okay, so we can build that, but then there's a problem here. How's that bridge going to stand up? How's it going to balance itself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the pathetic self is always questioning. The resilient self is providing the creative solutions. And this is how we can reconcile them together to work more in harmony, is that there's nothing wrong with questioning what's going on. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm not satisfied. But then move over to the resilient self, access essence, pull out the creative potential and ideas of essence, and then we can act from there. That allows us to thrive and create and evolve, as opposed to stagnating and hoarding and being narcissistic and chasing our tail and actually getting nowhere. The pathetic self only becomes destructive when it is driven by that gap and it's trying to conquer everything around it until it's actually destroyed all other worlds except its own. And then it realizes it's destroyed its own world. Does that make sense, that statement I just made?
Yeah.
Around the destructive nature of pathetic self. So what starts making sense here around how we get these two working in tandem with each other? Because for some it can be difficult to grasp.
Processing. Will we get a copy of the slides?
I don't usually give them, but you'll get a link to the replay of this where
Okay.
we post it on YouTube, and you could always take screen captures. If you want the slides, you can always email me to request them, and I'm giving you the...
Okay, that's kind of, I have been taking notes, so yeah.
And the email, by the way, you can email me at info@essence-dynamics.
Yeah, I've got that, thank you. I've made sure I've got that, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's see how we're doing for time. We've got some time left here. Now, okay, so let's say there's a polarity battle between pathetic self, resilient self, all right? Now, there's another polarity battle we have within our own bodies. This is between our animal nature and our divine nature. Let's say higher-minded thinking and lower-minded thinking, all right? So we have various body zones that have various functions. So we're very familiar with the head zone, the intellect, the brain, okay? This is where we gather information. This is where we navigate safety, where we categorize, where we process information, where 1 + 1 = 2, okay? 2 + 2 = 4. We can amalgamate various pieces of information and data and put it together in new combinations. What the head doesn't know is, where did 1 come from? It knows 1 + 1 = 2, but where did 1 come from? That's going to come from somewhere else, all right? We have our upper body, like our solar plexus, our heart, our chest, etc. This is more feeling oriented. It has to do with relationships, connections. This is our validation zone, our connection zone. So when the pathetic self grabs hold, it uses the heart to try to validate ourselves. Do you see me? Do you recognize me? Do you like me? Okay. The lower body is about drive and action. This is our stomach. This is our groin. This is where we have hunger, we have passion, we have lust, we have desire. This is where we have movement. And the lower we go, the more we become in touch with our animal nature, meaning basic survival, basic needs. The more higher up we go, the more we get more and more intellectual, more conceptual, okay? Why is that? Because our animal nature is closely connected to earth, physicality, coarse energy, all right? It also can be very vibrant and vitalizing. We get nutrients from the earth, okay? And we also spill our toxins into the earth, and the earth can recycle that, all right? It can recycle toxins back into nutrients. That's our root. We also then have the sky, the spirit, the will, the divine, our divine higher self, and we're always aspiring upwards into spirit, a return to the essential source. And then we have an attraction to the earth, an attraction to the coarse physicality. So religion will call that the God and the devil. We aspire and pray to a divine being, and then the devil tries to pull us down into our base animal nature so that we're going to go drinking and partying and having sex and indulging in the 7 deadly sins, all right? And it says, no, 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 you must cut that off and only aspire upwards to become a better person, all right? So we have this inner polarity between our body's natural attraction to the earthly energies, and then there is also our aspiration to return to essence, the divine source. The two are working together. And largely, we've been taught to have a separation. We've been taught to have that inner polarity battle as opposed to reconciling the two together. Some examples might be, in order to be a spiritual person, you may want to astral project all the time, and you'll want to fast, and you won't want to indulge in lower life activities, and you'll starve yourself of that, and you believe that you don't engage in violence, you don't fight, you don't argue, you only love everyone, and you can deny your body pleasure, even deny yourself sleep, because frankly, you'd rather live out of your body where you're in a better spiritual world. The opposite of that could be a very materialistic person that says, I don't believe in any divine intelligence. I just believe in myself, my own desires, and I'll get what I want. So I'm going to party all the time. I'm going to eat all I want, and I'm going to screw all I want. And I'm just going to make sure I make as much money as I can. And I'm just going to indulge. And then when I'm dead, I'm dead. So you can go on those extremes. Anyone, does this sound familiar to anyone? Does it ring any bells? Do you have any arguments against this? What are your responses?
From some of your explanations, I had to think of myself. From some others, I had to think of other people. So yeah, I get the picture.
Again, it's like we're treating this like as an either or. I either indulge in my lower energies, or I aspire into my higher energies. The point is they can work together in circulation. In order to live on this earth, we need to take care of our body. We need to pay attention to hunger. We also need to pay attention to the desire to reproduce so we can keep perpetuating our physical vehicles. We also want to be in touch with more than just our intellect or our feelings or our drive. We want to pull in divine source, divine creation, inspiration. And then that can further feed our body. And then we can pull in energies from the earth in order to feed ourselves, provide ourselves with nutrients. When this can become in balance, so Taoists call, and even alchemists, the marriage of heaven and earth, okay, is in the human being. This is a reconciled polarity that flows. It's a give and receive between the higher and the lower, and they balance each other out, and there's a flow. And what we do in EED is we find a resilient center, and then we start circulating these energies throughout the body. So we're pulling in earth energy into the body along with spirit energy into the body, and it recycles itself out in a perpetual motion where it's not about good and evil. It is about a creative vehicle. It's a vehicle for the creative expression of essence, and that vehicle is well taken care of. How does that sound?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So here's another way to look at it. From essence, that's a state of inertia, all being, infinite, everythingness, okay? We can get into that state, and in our courses, we teach you how to direct a person into that state and hold them there. The ego is going to fight it, but it can relax into the state of essence, which is nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to be, no identity here. Then the first glimmers of I am, or an identity, there will appear essential qualities. They're still unconditional. The main four are peace, or love, or unity, or limitlessness. all right? And that can be limitless creativity or limitless knowledge or limitless potential. Then from there, it can further specify itself into a particular singular strength. And there can be many. So just like you have primary colors of yellow, red, and blue, okay? And there's the peace, white light of peace, and the no colorness of state of essence. So then you can have variations. Red and blue can create green, red and blue can create purple, yellow and blue can create green, and there's all these various hues. And from those basic qualities, we can have diversified strengths like courage, self-expression, confidence, tenderness, warriorship, strength, solitude, etc. Okay, and then those you could call resilient selves, resilient strengths, resilient resources. But then we can forget our connection to that essence and they can distort, like be refracted off. And those strengths now become distorted or disconnected resources. And what we're doing is as we toggle from pathetic self to resilient self, those strengths are moving from a disconnected state to a realigned state, disconnected to realigned, all right? So what happens then is we may have some strengths that are pretty much aligned, others that are misaligned, others that are really, 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 really off, okay? This is where we can have then multiple pathetic selves, multiple identities, multiple strengths and resources within ourselves, some connected, some are not, okay? It's not like we live in this ideal state where everything is so aligned. That takes a life's work, a lifetime of work. But we can notice how we're getting aligned and misaligned and start dealing with our shadows, those little gaps that are breaking off our strengths or taking us away from essence, and start to close those gaps by dealing with our relationship to emptiness. That is the key, is to actually allow ourselves to flow through that gap back into essence. And that, in fact, is what we just did last week in our module 2, which is embodying essence. It's all about realigning pathetic selves back with essence. So any questions or observations there? It's just another way to look at resilient self, pathetic self in its multitude of expressions. How you guys doing with this? I know Paul and Benjamin, you've seen this. So this might be review, but are there any new insights here on what you're seeing?
It's a nice graph. I like how
I think it looks actually, sorry, Paul, I think it looks gross, actually. When it looks like squiggly worms all over the place. It looks creepy to me.
Okay.
Okay.
You're
Yeah.
right.
Go ahead with your comment there, yeah.
I was about to compliment the exact quality that you dislike in the graphic, which is the not equal long distance between those arrows, while they're all like coming from different shades of gray. No, okay, what I learned is the strength comes from the essence. I didn't have that in mind actually. So the strength we use in a moment to drive the moment is actually a hint to already what kind of essential quality we're accessing here.
That's right. So in practical terms, when a strength is fully aligned, okay, it's got a clean line back to essence. There's an outflow, an unconditional outflow from essence, which means it's a strength that is not threatened because it has an infinite foundation, so to speak, an infinite source, okay? The fountain flows through. When it's a disconnected strength, it's a false strength. It has no foundation. Therefore, there's all kinds of conditions. And this is where you'll see people overcompensating on a strength. Okay, they're not relaxed with it. It's like a warrior with the sword and says, don't you come and touch me because I've got my sword. I can kill you. And I'm super strong. And I know how to use this sword. And bang, 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 bang. I've been showing you how to use my sword. Okay. That's a disconnected strength. It's false strength because it has no foundation. It needs to constantly verify itself, validate itself, prove itself. Do you see my sword? Do you see how strong I am? When it's fully aligned with essence, I've got the sword, but I don't need to hold it. I don't even need to show it to you. I know I've got it. I know it's there. I also know how to use it, and I can pull it out at any time. Therefore, the most powerful samurai is the samurai that leaves the sword in its sheath. And it is fully prepared to use it, but it does not need to swing it around to threaten you with it. Do you understand? It stands there and it is in unconditional relationship with you. And if required, it will use it, and it has no hesitation. Does that make sense? The difference between false strength and strength from essence.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can ask yourself, all right, if I'm using this strength, what am I connected to? Are there conditions put upon it? And the fastest way there is, so then what if you take this away from me? Then what happens? A great question to ask yourself to get into essence is, what is something nobody can ever take away, no matter how hard they try? And I don't even need to defend it.
From Amy here from the group. She wrote me in the chat, but she wanted to write it to all, apparently. She wrote, it has slightly run over an hour, and she has another group. She's apologizing. And we'll
no, that's okay.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, Amy, I know I'm a little overtime. Sometimes I go overtime. You'll get a recording. And I'm pretty much at the end here. So, yeah, if you have to go, feel free to drop off because I know I'm a little overtime. So an essential quality is the state of source being before action. All we have to do is an exercise to say, all right, before I take action, what am I enjoying within myself right now? And focus on the vitality and the creativity we're experiencing. Okay, there are other webinars. Webinar 9, Core Vitality and Resilient Well-Being, really breaks this down. But basically, when we're in touch with essence, an essential quality, it is self-generating, it's unconditional, and it self-perpetuates. It's the state before action. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do, nothing to be. You simply are that quality. I am love, I am peace. And we can have that, we can locate it in a body center that feels activated and then circulate it. Then an energy, any energy we can start with can be distilled to its pure essence. We show you how to do that in webinar 9. Then you can start, once you've activated in yourself, you can then inject that quality into relationships, whether that's relationships to an event, a person, your world. And some key questions are, as I'm in relationship, resilient relationship with something, what am I taking on? What am I letting go of? What am I giving out? What am I taking in or receiving? And all the while, what am I enjoying? What you're basically doing is, as you experience this essential quality, you're seeing everything around you or the other person possessing that very same quality, made of the very same substance. No matter how they behave on the outside, they contain that quality on the inside. And that's what you begin interacting with. That's one way to open that bubble and create more fluidity in relationship.
So to some extent, the awareness that essence within us and essence within others is not really distinguished. So it means that once I connect to my essence, I'm instantly connected to the other's essence.
That's right. When I recognize the substance of the mirror within myself, I realize everyone is made of that same substance. And I'm not concerned with the size and the shape of the fragment anymore. It's really mirror to mirror. And that's creating more of a unity.
But it's not directly going through the other person. It's even more instant. So I'm connecting to the other person by connecting to something which is in myself.
Yes.
What we observe, at least to my understanding, is then the mirror effect. But this is rather the result.
That's the result. Yeah. It's starting from me. I'm sending it out. It's being mirrored back. And then for what's getting received on the other end, that's activating something in them. That's connecting them to their essence. They'll throw something back at me, which then I'll be reflecting back to them. And it's mirror to mirror, all right? Now, if on one end I'm focused on my differences and my individuality and I'm clinging to my uniqueness, well, that's going to get sent out, and that's going to get them to get rigid and start reflecting. And there's where we get back in the closed bubble of opposition. When I relax into the essence and realize, okay, I'm of essential substance, so are they, I'm sending that, they're relaxing into it too, simply by reflection. And we start reflecting back and forth that essence to essence nature. And we can still preserve our unique locations, our unique points of view, our unique individualities, but it's of a flow of essence to essence. It's like you can have a glass and a cup, but we realize we're both the liquid passing back and forth. And the liquid is experiencing the glass, then the liquid experiences the cup. So if we realize I am not my identity, nor are you, but we share the space in between, that's a very different feeling. And that allows us to have more of a fluid identity, where hot and cold can work together to create a full range and spectrum of temperature.
What do you mean, Troy, by sharing the space in between?
So that I'll realize that the real consciousness is actually between us, not in our individual polar opposites or ends. Our essence is everywhere.
Yeah, got it.
I'll feel localized on one end or the other, but I don't own that one end, right? Then I'm cutting myself off from flow. When I open to flow, I'll realize I'm at this end, but I can flow into the other end. And actually, we're both of the same substance in between. We're exchanging substances constantly. It's like red paint and blue paint, and then send over some blue paint, it accepts it, it mixes, it sends over some red paint, I accept it, mixes, and soon we're realizing we're both red and blue together. Do you understand? And it's some shade of purple that keeps morphing and changing. And then add in some yellow and add in some other colors, and we're all this myriad collection of colors. And we're able to shapeshift through it all when we realize the reality is not my vessel. The reality is the essence that flows between us everywhere. That's where we start to get a sense of being universal, of omnipresence, omnisentience, meaning able to feel connected with everything. That's where we get the sense of oneness. I'll give a quick summary, and then we'll do final comments here and final notes here. So just to summarize, identity is the vehicle for the creative expression of essence. That means that's why we have identity. It's in order to create. Essence in itself is not able to create because it's already there. It's static. It's the only unchanging substance. That is essence, because it is everything. Identity allows movement and fluidity because it can create one aspect of essence at a time. But when identity loses its connection with essence, it feels that separation. It feels the emptiness, that gap, and it becomes trapped by fear, which makes it seek an outside source through validation and control, and because it's trying to imitate the essence that it lost. It's trying to recapture it. It's using an outside source to recapture essence so it can become essence, and it's using constant validation and control to hold that essence in place because it does not want to lose it again, all right? And that's where we get the reactivity and the fear from. So our first steps toward reconnecting to our own source of essence or divine essence is actually stillness, because we are so hardwired to act, jump, create, react. Before anything, just take a moment of stillness recognize what's happening, recognize our judgments, recognize the fear of it, but then go beyond that into a simple acceptance of, okay, it is what it is. I heard the words were X, Y, Z. I don't care how I feel about it right now, but those are the words, okay? I can recognize it hurts me, etc. But when I come to an acceptance of that's what was said, instead of trying to defend or fight or change, when I come to a simple acceptance of the moment, that opens my connection to essence, which plugs me into some resilience. I'm able to open, by accepting, I'm opening myself to some humility, and I'm making myself available for fluidity, all right? Other webinars cover that in much more detail, but the key here is stillness and acceptance in order to start connecting to essence. Then to simply enjoy the timeless nature of essence, and its main quality is a feeling of calm, wholeness, an unconditional wholeness. When we focus on that, that starts to calm the ego down, and it can start loosening its grip. It can start relaxing it so it's not so eager to act. And on top of that, when we allow ourselves to notice how that energy of vitality from essence feeds our well-being and nurtures us, that lets the ego know we are surviving. And so then it can start taking a back seat. And the more we are nurtured by our connection to essence, the more the ego is willing to flow with it. And by the way, the next webinar is going to be on opening those flow states to bring creativity out. If we keep reinforcing our identity, and that means reinforcing separation, division, differentness, uniqueness, individuality, okay, that's going to reinforce all these rules of the games that we play, all the rules and conditions. All that does is it feeds our stories, which aggravates the divide and the disconnect that our identities feel. And then all identities are just going to try and conquer each other because they're playing a status game of which one is better than the other, which one is stronger than the other. As soon as we calm down for a moment, accept that there are always differences, but if we remember we're all made of that same divine substance called essence, we can actually start to look at each other and allow ourselves to be influenced by each other and become more complementary. Just because I receive your stuff doesn't mean I'm going to be destroyed. When I'm connected to essence, if I'm disconnected, your stuff will be poison. So when we remember we're all divine essence, then we can realize every identity provides diversity in relationships. So this is the other problem. We're not here to eliminate identity. We're not here to make everybody the same. We're not here to make everyone equal. We're here to realize that without diversity and variety, we don't have an expression of essence. Essence is rich. So we need differences to create diversity in relationships, which creates diversity of experience. When we are connected to our internal essence, we can be fluid in the ways we interact, the way we interact with sameness, differences, diversity. But what it will do is that diversity enriches all of our lives' experiences, and we don't have to put status on differences. This is the main difference between game and dream. Game holds status in order to hold identity. Dream has no status, and it makes all identities complementary. So if we remember, all identities come from a pure expression of essence. The good and the bad behaviors are all sourced from a pure intention, a pure expression of essence. Now, when that feeling of separateness, that gap gets aggravated, then that aggravates the fear, the emptiness, and that separation. That creates distortions of that pure expression. Remember that diagram of the strength gets broken off. So what we're seeing a lot of times when we're in conflict or when we're in opposition is we're seeing distortions of essence. What we need to pay attention to is the purity behind whatever expression we see in front of us. There's always a purity behind the behaviors we see. That again allows us to open that horizontal exchange of energy where we're connected to essence. We can project out that essential quality. It starts getting mirrored back. So again, don't pay attention so much to the size and the shape of the fragment. Pay attention to the substance of the mirror, that we all contain essence. This allows us to calm those distorted expressions down so they can transmute into a more pure expression, a vehicle of essence, or channel the essence through. Then we actually calm our own penchant for conflict or opposition or proving ourselves. All identities are coming from essence. What are your final thoughts here as I go through the summary here, or what are you taking away for yourself? By the way, those are the courses coming up. Our next webinar is on flow states and creativity, which is a continuation of this. It's how do you facilitate that flow of essence through you. We have our live courses coming up in Paris and Frankfurt in October. We have our team dynamics course coming up in November in Frankfurt. The requirement is module 2, and that module 2 is coming up in November in Munich. And I'm going to be organizing an online course. It's going to start sometime during the summer, or I may wait until September. I haven't made the decision yet, but we will do another online version of module 1. So yeah, what are your takeaways?
My takeaway is that essence is everywhere. And I would like to extend the statement, last one. And it's not just identities, it's the general life force that becomes more and more one. Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Benjamin? What are you walking away with here?
Well, a brighter clarity of what's the connection. That's basically the connection to my essence, myself, replicates with the other person, like quantum mechanics. So that's clearer than before, yes.
Great. I think what we're doing is we're setting off sparks in each other. And if we can remember all those sparks are divine, it calms everything down so that we can focus on being complementary and co-creative with each other, as opposed to being so obsessed with protecting everything and withholding creative flow from each other. That's what makes it destructive. That's what creates the suffering. But it takes resilience and humility. All right, and that's the main work, is continually developing the resilience. And in other webinars, we talk about, well, because some may have questions about, well, how do you hold justice and accountability and etc. We've got that in the other webinars, particularly War Games of Identity, the Unnatural Nature of Forgiveness. And then, well, how do I circulate essence through me, or how do I build resilience? Well, we've got some other webinars on that, and then that is what all the EED courses are about, is how do you get that started practically? How do you apply it in all kinds of different situations? So for those listening, if you're interested in that, look at the website, essence-dynamics.com, or contact me, info@essence-dynamics.com, and request some courses or some practice or other webinars. So those are my final words. That I know I'm presenting concept, but this is very practical. And as you know, Benjamin and Paul, you've taken these courses before. You get direct experiences of what that essence is and how it flows. And then it just takes practice and discipline and that to master that. We can have a more open, free flow, because we're going to open, close, open, close, open, close all the time. And that takes a lifetime of mastery. But we can transmute ourselves into that marriage of heaven and earth, to be a really divine human being, where we have the earth and the heavenly energies flowing through us in balance.
Yeah.
That, I think, is ultimately what we're going for. And I think just the way we started off, that I think is the goal of all essential spiritual systems. That is not talking about religions or religious practice. That is the essence behind all the religions. It's that connection to source. And that we all are source. We are all a fragment of the shattered mirror. And we are all of the substance of the divine. And we're all here to express all the possible potentials of that divine, so the divine can live through us and with us and in us. And so it doesn't mean we're going on an ego trip saying, oh, I contain God, therefore I am God. It's not that. We're all an expression of it. We're all an expression of the divine creation. And we are all taking part in that divine creation. So I ended on a metaphysical note. So thank you all for attending. Thank you all for listening to the recording. And then I hope to see you next time. And any feedback, please send it to me. Any questions, please send it to me at the email, or even leave comments on the comment section of YouTube, and feel free to subscribe, because we'll be releasing these webinars every once in a while on the public end of the YouTube channel. So until then, keep brilliant, radiant, and enjoy connecting to the to essential moments within yourself.